On the 3rd of October, 1849, a printer walking past a Baltimore tavern found a man collapsed outside the door. It was election day. The man was barely conscious, he couldn't explain himself, and he was wearing clothes that weren't his own. 4 days later, he died in a hospital bed. No autopsy, no surviving hospital record, and no one has ever established what killed him. That's the first mystery, and it's the famous one. The second one is bigger. 2 days after the death, a New York paper ran an obituary telling readers that hardly anyone would be sorry. It was signed with a false name. The man who wrote it had been the dead man's rival for years, and within 2 weeks he had legal control of everything that writer had ever put on paper. Then he wrote a biography. The drunk, the addict, the friendless lunatic, the version you already have in your head before I've said the name, most of it comes out of that one book. Scholars later caught its author forging the evidence, Edgar Allan Poe. Dead at 40, and then rewritten by the man who buried him. He was born on the 19th of January, 1809, in Boston, to 2 traveling actors. That was not a respectable job in 1809. His father, David Poe Jr., walked out on the family while the children were tiny and then vanished from the record so completely that historians still can't agree on the year he died. His mother, Eliza, kept working. She was 24 when tuberculosis killed her in Richmond on the 8th of December, 1811. He was not yet 3 years old. 18 days after that, a Richmond tobacco merchant called John Allen and his wife Frances took the boy into their house. They gave him a home, an education, and the middle name he has carried ever since. What they never gave him was a legal adoption. That sounds like paperwork. It wasn't. It meant that when the money came, and the arguments came, he had no claim on any of it, and everyone in that house knew it from the beginning. He grew up rich, and he grew up a guest. In February 1826, he enrolled at the University of Virginia, 17 years old, with nowhere near enough money to live on. He gambled to close the gap and lost. His foster father refused to cover the debts and pulled him out inside a year. So he did something odd for a boy raised in a mansion. In May 1827, he walked into a Boston recruiting office, lied about his age, gave a false name, Edgar Perry, and enlisted as a private soldier. And he was good at it. He served at Fort Moultrie in South Carolina, then Fortress Monroe in Virginia. And by the 1st of January 1829, he was a sergeant major, which was as high as an enlisted man could go. Then he talked his way out of the army and into West Point, and found that Richmond still wouldn't fund him and still wouldn't sign the papers that would let him resign. So he engineered his own destruction. He stopped going to drills. He stopped going to class. He ignored every order he was given until the court-martial had nowhere left to go, and on the 6th of March, 1831, the Academy threw him out. He was 22, with nothing behind him at all. On the 16th of May, 1836, in Richmond, he married his first cousin, Virginia Clem. He was 27. She was 13. The marriage bond recorded her age as 21, which was simply untrue, and the people signing it knew that. Historians disagree about whether the marriage was consummated at the time, and there is no way now to settle it. What is documented is the household: Virginia, Edgar, and Virginia's mother, Maria Clem, who cooked and borrowed and begged and held the 3 of them together for the rest of his life. Then, on the 20th of January, 1842, Virginia was singing at the piano and a blood vessel burst in her throat. He wrote about it 2 weeks later and said his dear little wife had been dangerously ill, that in singing she had ruptured a blood vessel. It was tuberculosis. It took 5 more years to kill her, in stages, with recoveries in between that were crueler than the relapses, because he kept believing them. She died in the cottage at Fordham on the 30th of January 1847. She was 24, exactly the age his mother had been. Keep the drinking in mind. We'll come back to what the record actually shows. All of that was happening alongside the work that made his name. From September 1835 he worked on, then ran, the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond and turned a small regional magazine into a national one. Then Burton's Gentleman's Magazine in Philadelphia, where the owner fired him in June 1840. Then Graham's, at $800 a year, the steadiest money he ever had. And in the April 1841 issue of Graham's, he published a story about a locked room in Paris, 2 dead women, a police force with nothing, and an eccentric amateur named Dupin who solves it by reasoning from the physical evidence. It's generally credited as the first modern detective story. The pieces it put in place, the brilliant outsider, the useless police, the clue read correctly, the reveal at the end, are still the pieces. But the work that paid the rent wasn't fiction. He was a reviewer, and he was vicious. Close to 1,000 reviews and critical essays in 14 years, going after reputations that other American critics were carefully protecting. They called him the Tomahawk Man. They called him the Comanche of literature. Even admirers agreed he was merciless. That made him enemies who outlived him, and one of them turns out to be the whole second half of this story. On the 29th of January 1845, the New York Evening Mirror printed The Raven. It went everywhere. Reprinted, parodied, recited, set to music, argued over. It made him a household name almost overnight. He was reportedly paid $9 for it. Even that figure comes hedged in the best scholarly account of his earnings, which says it may have paid him only $9 because the records are thin. The rest of the ledger is no better. $56 for the story that started detective fiction. $12 for the Mask of the Red Death. $12 for the Purloined Letter. $15 for the Cask of Amontillado. Across roughly 14 years of professional writing, supporting a household of 3, his entire literary earnings came to something like $6,200. He tried to fix it the only way he could see. He took over the Broadway Journal in 1845, then took on debt to own it outright, which made him the owner of a national magazine and also in debt for it. It folded on the 3rd of January 1846, inside a year. He was famous and he was broke, and the two facts had almost nothing to do with each other. The enemy who mattered was called Rufus Wilmot Griswold. In 1842, he published an anthology, The Poets and Poetry of America, and it was the book that decided which American poets counted. It included 3 of Poe's poems with faint praise. Poe privately called the thing an outrageous humbug. Then he accepted $10 from Griswold and wrote a public review noticeably kinder than his private opinion, a payment he later described, in effect, as a bribe he had taken. That is not a flattering fact about Poe, and it belongs in the story. Then it got worse. Griswold took over Poe's old job at Graham's in 1842 on a better salary. In November 1843, Poe began giving public lectures with the same title as the anthology and used them to attack it and its editor in front of paying audiences. George Graham remembered Poe giving Griswold raps over the knuckles hard enough to be remembered. And through the middle of the decade, both men paid very public attention to the same married poet, Francis Sargent Osgood, which one scholar reads as the real engine of the feud, though that is an interpretation and not a documented fact. The two of them reconciled more than once. Neither ever meant it. He left Richmond around the 27th of September, 1849, bound for Philadelphia on business and then New York. He never got there. For about 5 days, there is no reliable record of where he was or what he was doing. On the 3rd of October, Election Day in Baltimore, a printer named Joseph Walker found him outside Ryan's 4th Ward polls, a tavern being used that day as a polling place. Walker's note to a Dr. Poe knew still survives. It describes a gentleman, rather the worse for wear, at Ryan's 4th Ward polls who appears to be in great distress. Every account of what he had on describes the same thing. Cheap, filthy, badly fitting clothes that the people who knew him said were not his own. The exact list of garments shifts depending on which witness is telling it, and the two main witnesses contradict each other on the details. He was taken to Washington College Hospital. He drifted in and out and never gave a coherent account of the missing days. His doctor said that on the last night he called out a name over and over. Reynolds. Nobody has ever worked out who that was. He died in the early hours of the 7th of October, 1849. He was 40 years old. No autopsy was performed. The Poe Society of Baltimore says no death certificate was filed, apparently because the city didn't require one yet, and the hospital's records have never been found. A Baltimore paper reported the cause as congestion of the brain, which in 1849 meant very little. So theories filled the gap. Alcohol is the oldest one, pushed hardest by the Dr. Walker sent for, a temperance campaigner who used Poe's death as a lecture for years afterwards. The physician who actually treated him said the opposite, flatly, that Poe was not intoxicated and there was no smell of liquor on him. Both men's reliability has been picked apart since, and they cannot both be right. Then there's co-oping. Baltimore gangs really did seize men on election day, get them drunk, change their clothes, and walk them around the polls to vote again and again, and Baltimore papers that same week warned that co-ops had been started. It fits the clothes. It fits the address. It is also entirely circumstantial, and the careful sources say so. In 1996, a cardiologist who was handed the case notes with no name attached diagnosed rabies, which is a serious argument with a hole in it. There is no record of a bite, and Poe reportedly drank half a glass of water without difficulty. Carbon monoxide, syphilis, a brain tumor, epilepsy, heart disease, murder. All proposed. None proven. And as for Reynolds, 3 candidates, no answer, and one scholar who argues the whole anecdote came from a doctor whose story changed every time he told it. Go back to the 9th of October, 2 days after the death. The funeral had happened the day before, about 3 minutes long, in cold, damp weather, with a handful of people at the graveside. That morning, the New York Tribune ran a long obituary, signed with the name Ludwig. Most obituaries take a while to arrive at the criticism. This one got there in its 3rd sentence.
This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it.
Then it kept going. It said he had readers in England and in Europe, but few or no friends. It described him walking the streets, in madness or melancholy, with lips moving in indistinct curses. It said he regarded society as composed altogether of villains. That last stretch, the madness and the curses, was later traced almost word for word to a novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton. It was not an observation of Poe at all. It was a passage of fiction, lifted and dropped onto a man who had been dead 4 days. And it signed off with a line from Macbeth about sleeping well after life's fitful fever, which is a peculiar thing to write about someone you have just told the country not to mourn. Ludwig was Griswold. People worked that out almost immediately, and it changed nothing, because by then he had something far more useful than a pseudonym. Poe's mother-in-law, Maria Clem, was destitute and had no one. Within about a week of the death, she had settled on Griswold to edit and publish everything Poe left behind. There is a document. It stated the 15th of October, 1849, notarized 5 days later in Brooklyn, and it makes 2 assertions. That Clem was the sole owner and lawful possessor of the writings and literary remains of the late Edgar Poe, and that Poe himself, before he died, had expressly wished and enjoined that Griswold should compile and edit them. Neither assertion holds. Poe's nearest legal relative was his sister Rosalie, not Clem, so Clem had no estate to sign away. And no evidence has ever been produced that Poe appointed Griswold anything. The document carries no witnesses. Clem herself is reported to have said afterwards that Poe had not intended him at all. What she got out of the arrangement was sets of the printed books to sell herself. Griswold got the rights, the manuscripts, and the income. And in December, writing privately to one of the people defending Poe's memory, he set out his own position on the man whose reputation he now owned.
I was not his friend, nor was he mine.
The Memoir of the author came out in January 1850, attached to Griswold's edition of the collected works. This is the source of very nearly everything. It said Poe was expelled from the University of Virginia for wild and reckless behavior, when he had actually withdrawn over debts. It said he deserted from the army when he'd been honorably discharged. It called his first book a lie. It invented a dark secret involving John Allan's second wife. It invented a blackmail scheme against an unnamed literary woman in South Carolina. It said he showed scarcely any virtue in either his life or his writings. And then there were the letters. Griswold printed letters from Poe to himself as evidence, and several of them are forged. Not exaggerated. Forged. One is an invented letter praising Griswold's anthology in terms Poe never used about anything. One is a real letter with self-serving flattery threaded through it, sentence by sentence. One is a real letter with a fake apology bolted onto the end. One had a whole postscript added, insulting one of Poe's own correspondents, and the postscript refers to a magazine owner who no longer owned the magazine, which is how you catch a forger. In 1941, a scholar called Arthur Hobson Quinn printed Griswold's versions and the surviving originals side by side, page against page. There was nothing left to argue about. So what is actually true about the drinking? He drank, and it did real damage. But the pattern in the record isn't a daily drunk. It's months, sometimes years, of nothing at all, broken by short and catastrophic binges. He seems to have had almost no physical tolerance for it. One glass could put him out for days, and his father and his older brother had the same trouble, which is a shape a lot of families will recognize. The worst of it lines up with Virginia's 5-year illness and her death. He wrote about that himself in January 1848 to a reader who had asked him straight out, and he was blunt about which way he thought the cause ran.
As a matter of course, my enemies referred the insanity to the drink rather than the drink to the insanity.
The opium is thinner still. The men who examined him, including one who genuinely detested him, said they never saw a sign of it. The opium in his stories is in his narrators, not in him. There is one recent argument, from a historian working with an interview given in the 1880s, that he may have used it occasionally in the early 40s, and that is a live scholarly question rather than a settled one. It is also nothing like the addict the memoir sold. In late August 1849, about 6 weeks before he died, he joined the Sons of Temperance in Richmond. That's the man the memoir buried. The rebuttal started almost at once. George Graham, who had employed both men, published one in March 1850, accusing Griswold of letting old prejudices and old enmities steal into the colouring of his picture. Thomas Holly Chivers wrote an entire book against it. Sarah Helen Whitman and Charles Briggs went after it in print. For a man with few or no friends, he had a striking number of people willing to fight about him. It made no difference. The Poe Museum's summary of what happened next is about as blunt as history writing gets. For every magazine that carried a condemnation of Griswold, 3 repeated his slanders as fact. And Griswold controlled the rights. His edition, with the memoir bolted to the front of it, was the standard and most available Poe for roughly 25 years. If you wanted the stories, you bought the book with the lie in it. Griswold died in 1857 and it kept selling. The correction came slowly and from outside. An Englishman called John Henry Ingram spent the 1870s gathering over 1,000 original documents, letters, eyewitness accounts, anything he could reach, and published a 2-volume Life in 1880 built on the paper instead of the gossip. Then Quinn, 60 years after that. He was found at a polling place in another man's clothes, and nobody has ever established how he got there or what killed him. That much is honestly unknown, and it will probably stay unknown. The rest of it though, the madness, the gutter, the friendlessness, the drugs, was never a mystery at all. It was written down on purpose by a man who had resented him for the better part of a decade, who took control of the estate through a grieving woman who had no right to give it, using a document that wouldn't survive 10 minutes in front of a judge, and who forged the letters he then quoted as proof. And it worked for the better part of a century. That's the part worth sitting with.